0345 6060 973.
11 minutes before 8 is the time. Well, let's come back to our conversation. Having some transport issues, of course, yesterday, and let's put that now to Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, who joins me. We're going to be talking about great work that's happening with the Trans-Pennine route upgrade in just a moment. But first, Secretary of State, can I ask you, there were, as you'll be aware, troubles with some railway lines. Vauxhall, I think, had buckled tracks. Why is that? What is the problem with our railway lines that would not seem to be the same issue in the south of France or Italy? Good morning.
Yeah, morning. Well, actually, I've been talking to some of my colleagues across the continent, and everyone is having significant issues at the moment. Right. Obviously, in the UK, we are about to have probably today the hottest ever recorded temperature. And put simply, our rail infrastructure, our transport infrastructure, in fact, the country's infrastructure, wasn't built to withstand 40 degrees because we haven't seen it before. And we are clearly going to have to make sure that that kind of standard of infrastructure is put in for the future because we're going to see more of this happening by all accounts.
Will we need to get to a point where most, if not all, railway carriages have some form of air conditioning, would you say, Secretary of State?
Yeah, absolutely, and actually that's the way it's moving. So if you go on some of the newer trains, the Azumas, for example, the 700s or 717s or 707s, for those who are train geeks like me, you will find these lovely trains are air conditioned and properly heated for the winter. So trains are very much moving that way. We've seen it on the Elizabeth line, and indeed the trains that will ultimately run on the Trans-Pennine route upgrade that I'm announcing today, up to £11.5 billion for faster trains between Manchester and Leeds.
And more on that in a moment, more on that. But just finally on that, I'm not a train geek. What service then currently, what was it, the Zika trains? What service would I find?
Azuma,
my apologies.
Those are 700s and 701s.
Right. Who has got those currently in the country?
Sorry, 800s and 801s.
You really do know your trains.
Yeah.
Where are they currently to be found, Mr. Shapps, or are they actually just being effectively rolled out now?
No, so a lot of people, commuters in London, will be familiar with trains which are air conditions. For example, from my constituency in Welwyn Garden and Hatfield, the 717s run from there into London. These are Siemens trains. I went to the factory the other week. These are trains which are so beautifully built that they tell you when they're going to go wrong in advance. They almost tell you when they're going to need service and tell you to book them in next month and things like that. The infrastructure is getting better and better. What we need to do is kind of speed through improving it to be more resilient against some of this extreme weather, both hot and cold, that we're going to see much more of in the years to come.
I know you're keen to tell listeners across the whole of the country, but particularly in the area, what's happening for the Trans-Pennine route upgrade. So do go ahead, Secretary of State.
Yeah, so at the moment, if you travel across the Pennines from, for example, Manchester to Leeds, that journey is nearly an hour. This upgrade that I've talked about, which is a multi-year major upgrade, will mean that you'll travel from Manchester to Leeds in just over 30 minutes. So it's a huge improvement. The sort of levelling up agenda that we've talked so much about in action. And it means that ultimately, actually, you'll be able to travel right across the north from, say, Liverpool to Warrington to Manchester to Leeds to York, and do so in great comfort, air-conditioned as it happens, but also on lines which are being electrified with new digital signalling and new tracks. So this is a massive improvement, all part of our nearly £100 billion upgrade to the railways that we announced recently in what we call the Integrated Rail Plan. And this is part of it. So if you're anywhere around Manchester, Leeds, York, this is coming your way to huge benefit.
And this is being delivered solely by better rolling stock, is it?
No, this will be a combination of things. Primarily electrification of the line all the way across. New lines added in. There are pinch points on the line where there are perhaps just two tracks and we'll go up to 3 and 4. Brand new railway laid in the longer run for this upgrade between Manchester and Marsden, which takes out a bottleneck. And digital signalling. Now, digital signalling, it means you get rid of the old Victorian signalling where you have literally traffic lights spaced along the railway, and you move to a system where the signalling effectively moves into the cab for the train driver. They can see on the screen where they need to start and stop. You can fit more trains more safely into a smaller stretch of track. So that's the way forward. We're about to upgrade the East Coast Main Line large parts of that to digital signalling, and it will mean a more efficient railway. So there are lots of different things that will more or less halve the journey time from Manchester to Leeds across the Pennine for passengers in the next 10 or so years.
So that's the way forward there. What's the way forward for the Conservative Party? And can I put it to you that the four contenders that we are now in, we've not heard a lot about levelling up from them, Secretary of State. Is that a fair criticism?
So you've got four different candidates in at the moment. As you know, I'm supporting Rishi.
You are.
And he is a huge fan of levelling up. He represents a northern seat, as it happens, and has
not said a lot about it in these debates, though, has he? And neither have any of his colleagues either, have they? I wonder, do you sense it slipped a little bit down the agenda, Secretary of State?
I think the interesting thing about the debate at the moment in Parliament is it's been, I think it's fair to say, largely a debate about how you run the economy. I think when it gets out of Parliament and into the country, so the last two, of which, of course, I hope that Rishi is one of them. It's not there yet, but I very much hope he's one of the two. I think as the most experienced candidate, he's the person who would be able to step into the job as Prime Minister on day one and get on with that job. And out in the country, of course, I think there's a much wider agenda that will be discussed, including things like how we ensure that no matter where you live in this country, you get the same opportunities. And I think that's a very basic principle, very, very important for this country, to ensure that your opportunities are not related to which part of the country you happen to be born in anymore.
A couple of other matters just to explore with you. Public sector pay rises could be capped at a low percentage figure, around 5%, to try and combat inflation. That, though, could lead to a lot of strikes, as you'll be aware, a lot of strikes, not just on the transport sector, Secretary of State. How concerned should my listeners be about this?
Well, look, one thing we don't want to do is allow inflation to run out of control. When that happens, you get into a vicious circle where you'll never, and it erodes people's income, it erodes people's savings. And again, this is where Rishi in particular has been very clear that what we need to do is grapple inflation. This is a spike going through the system caused, as we know, by Putin's war in Ukraine and the big upset that's had to, for example, fuel supplies. It's very important that we don't chase that inflation. Otherwise, we will permanently be poorer. And that's why a plan which gets us back on track as quickly as possible is important. And pay rises will need to reflect that.
That rail strike's all going to happen in about 8 days' time?
Well, I don't think it needs to. Look, we have railway workers, which I'm proud to say are very well paid in this country. I see that the previous strike by the RMT is being joined now by ASLEF. Those are the train drivers. But it would interest your listeners to know that the median salary for a train driver is nearly £60,000 a year. Now, governments have to make difficult decisions about whether you pay more to doctors and nurses, care workers, and I think that train drivers have a reasonably good deal at £60,000 a year. They can be paid more, they will be paid more, but we need some modernisation in return. For example, more people are using our trains at the weekend than before coronavirus, but some of these contracts don't require train drivers, some of whom only need to work 4 days a week, to work at the weekends and on Sundays in particular at all. So it's done in a voluntary way on some lines. And we can't carry on running a railway service like that in the 21st century, where it's voluntary as to whether you turn up to do the job or not.
Last couple of points. It would appear, the sense was that the Prime Minister made his final appearance in the House of Commons yesterday. If that is the case, how shall we remember him?
Well, I think he'll be remembered as somebody who was very good with some of the big picture stuff. So, he got Brexit done, he got the vaccine rolled out in this country before elsewhere, got us out of the lockdown, the first in Europe, has led in the war in Ukraine in defending the West against Putin's aggression. So I think on the very big calls, he'll be remembered for those things. To be blunt, he got some of the smaller stuff wrong and disastrously, from his point of view, of course.
But wasn't that long ago you were defending him on this show, though, Mr. Shapps?
Well, I always thought, and I still think, Nick, that on balance, with the big things, and for example, take the AstraZeneca, Oxford AstraZeneca drug that he pushed for development, pushed for the factories, pushed to get it out first. I see that has been used to vaccinate more people, not just in this country, but globally than any other. And it's saved literally millions of lives. Now, I think on those very big calls, he was an exceptional Prime Minister. Clearly, it is also true that, in the end, not looking after some of the small details is one of the reasons why he has left office much sooner than he would have done.
Talk about leaving office, lastly, and currently as we speak, still in office, is the Police and Crime Commissioner for Nottinghamshire. This despite the fact that Caroline Henry has been caught speeding 5 times in less than 3 months, including 2 offences on consecutive days, and has now appeared before the courts and has been sentenced. She happens to be a Conservative. She must stand down, mustn't she?
I'm not familiar with the actual story itself, but I have to say, from your description, that does sound quite extreme for a Police and Crime Commissioner.
Can't stay in post, can she, Mr. Shapps?
Well, I'll leave that to others, but I would have thought that, and I haven't been tracking that story, but I have to say, I think it is important that somebody who's in that position is seen to be upholding the law, given that they're in charge of the law.
Grateful as ever for your time. Thank you. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps appearing here on LBC, where at 8 o'clock the news is next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, it's expected to be the hottest day on record for the UK. Forecasters say temperatures will exceed 40 Celsius for the first time. Weatherman John Ketley